So now we'll check and see if everything functions appropriately. Okay, if you can see, in this case, we don't quite have enough over travel. I'm pressing on the trigger, it's rotating the sear, but the sear is not rotating all the way out of the way of the striker. And in some cases, with some guns, you may find that if you pull up on the slide as you hold the trigger back, that the striker will fall. In this case, it doesn't, which means I need a reasonable amount of, a little more reasonable amount of over travel. I forgot one thing. Pull this out of the way. Okay, for this portion I'm going to need a set of feeler gauges, which you can pick up pretty much at any hardware store or an automotive store. And what I'm going to do is, if you look where the candy cane or the loop rolls over, there's a gap between this horizontal surface, that horizontal surface, and where the formation of the loop is. So what I'm going to do is use the feeler gauges to find out what that spacing is. This is a 6/1000 feeler gauge, and it just slides in. So that's 6/1000. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add 5/1000 to that, which means for a total of 11/1000. I can go to the 11/1000 feeler gauge, and that's what I'm going to use to see what kind of spacing I have. Now the way we open the loop is I'm going to insert a small screwdriver into the surface, or the left side of the loop, and I'm going to rotate counterclockwise. It doesn't take a whole lot of force because the formed loops are not particularly, it's not a severely heat treated surface, which means it should flex pretty easily. And then I'm going to use my feeler gauge at the 11/1000 and see if I can slide that through. And it's just a little bit tight, so I'm going to add just a little bit more. So again, inserting it into the left side of the trigger bar, rotating counterclockwise to open the loop up a little bit more. And that slides in. So now when I put it all back together, what I've done is effectively change the slope so that the slope engages the sear cam sooner. That allows the back end of the sear to rotate just a little bit further. Again, I'm doing this halfway just to secure the sear housing block. Putting the slide back on. Flipping the sear deactivation lever down, or back up rather. I get a reset. It looks like I need to go a little bit more. So I'm just at that point when I lift it up on the back of the slide, the striker fell, so I need to go probably another in between 2/1000 to 5/1000. In this case, I'm going to go an additional 5/1000 just to make sure. The over travel is limited by the back of the trigger body, and that's the way I wanted to do it. And the reason I did that was because it takes all the stress off of these two pins. Typically, if you stop the trigger travel off of the back end of the trigger bar or the Sear housing block, it applies stress to the pin, and what happens is eventually under recoil this pin will start to walk out. The other thing that happens with the two-piece trigger is that if it stops, the bottom end of the trigger still is allowed to free float and move even further back. That causes stress on this pin that holds it to the upper portion of the trigger body, and that's where things can walk out as well. So if you're using a factory stock trigger and have adjusted over travel based upon the trigger bar or the Sear housing block, just be aware of that. Alright, so we're going back in. Pop the pin out. And in this case, I'm going to go to a total of 16 thousandths. So I'm going to use the screwdriver again, insert into the loop, rotate just a little bit, and we got 16 thousandths now. With this style of frame where it has the frame plug, also be careful not to lose that frame plug. That acts as a spacer. There's two steel runners that run on the left and the right side that are embedded in the frame, and it's meant to have support from the Sear housing block, and that spacer is what fills the void. If you leave it out and you start to shoot it, what happens is the flexing of the frame will end up distorting that, and when you find out that you want to put one in, it will have flexed to the point where in many cases you won't be able to put the Sear housing block in. Alright, let's see if we've added enough. There we go. So now, at a total of 16 thousandths, I take up the slack, I feel the ledge where the slope of the trigger bar loop hits the Sear cam, and now I have the appropriate amount of over travel. Ideally you should have at least a few thousandths of an inch of additional over travel, and the reason I say that is because under recoil, when the gun fires, and the slide moves back and the Sear resets, if you don't have enough over travel on it, it'll mean that the side body profile of the candy cane isn't moving far enough back. And by that, what happens is if there's any Sear flutter and you have no over travel, any type of flutter will cause the trigger bar to snap underneath. And when that happens, it'll occur under the recoil impulse as the gun is rocking back. Well, if that happens, it can hold the Sear in a downward position to where it's just below the surface of the striker. So when the slide goes forwards, it will result in a dead trigger. So have at least 5 to 6 thousandths of over travel measured from back here on the back end of the trigger, from where the striker releases. And basically there's no real litmus test to it other than the fact that when I pull the trigger and the striker releases, I feel the trigger move just a little bit. It doesn't have to move a whole lot, but it does need to move a little bit. And that's how you install the AEK trigger. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact us at www.apextactical.com. Thank you.